October 21st, 1967. 50,000 people, a part of a larger contingent protesting against US involvement in the Vietnam War, marched towards the Pentagon in a huge display of civic resistance. By the morning of the 22nd, almost 700 people had been arrested, a handful of people were injured, and one of the most notable events of 60s counterculture had finished. However, we're not here today to talk about the culturally significant part. No, let's talk about the stupid bit. So join me as we take a look at the people who tried to lift the Pentagon. Our story starts, as these stories often do, with a rich kid that got way into spiritual stuff. John Starr Cook was born in the lap of luxury in 1920. His father ran the Bank of Hawaii, as had his father before him. John wasn't particularly interested in this. Instead, he focused his efforts on the occult. On an interview, his sister Alice remembers John having an interest in tarot from an early age, apparently stemming from accidentally buying a tarot deck instead of a conventional one back when he was a kid. By 1963, he had created his own deck of tarot cards and was living in Mexico. It's here that he met a young artist by the name of Michael Bowen. Over time, Bowen would come to regard Cook as his guru, following his recommendations to seek Dr. Timothy Leary. For the younger members of the audience, that's the LSD guy, and keeping him up to date about the goings of the counterculture movement that was gathering traction in the States. A movement he quickly stood at the forefront of, moving back to San Francisco and organizing events such as the Human Being, where 25,000 people descended onto Golden Gate Park to show opposition against a law banning the use of LSD in California. The movement caught the nation by storm. It was followed by the Summer of Love, which brought together 100,000 hippies, beats, and indeed anyone who wasn't sold on the Norman Rockwell vision of America. A vision they felt was getting more corrupted by the second as they saw the government crack down on anything that didn't align with it. After the Summer of Love, it was time to take the spirit of counterculture and positive energy to the nation's capital and push back against that crackdown. Bowen knew exactly what the target of their action should be. A building hosting the people running the war and built in the most evil shape of all. It all became clear to him after, according to writer Paul Krasner and photographer Gene Anthony, reading a book and listening to a holy man called Charlie Brown. I'm just going to go ahead and add that it probably had to do with drugs. Lots and lots of drugs. Now, there is an important question. Why is the Pentagon shaped like that? Well, as much as I would like to sit here and tell you that it's because that's where the Illuminatis go to make their ritual sacrifices to appease the elder gods and assure a good harvest, the answer is altogether more boring. The Department of War had been using these ugly tent buildings that were built in the National Mall since World War I, and they were quickly running out of space. By 1941, with the US carefully monitoring the ongoing conflict in Europe, just in case they were pulled into it, the need for space was worse than ever. They needed a new building. Brigadier General Brion Somervell, head of the construction department of the Quartermaster Corps, did not pussyfoot around with their requirements. Space for 40,000 people, parking for 10,000 cars. A skyscraper was right out of the question. It'd have to be so tall that it would dominate the skyline of the capital. Not a good look to have the war building tower over the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. Besides which, the steel needed for such a thing would be better used in warships. Just in case. The result was a sprawling low-rise that was going to be constructed on a Pentagon-ish shaped bit of land, so the original design was going to be Pentagon-ish. But President Roosevelt, who had a hand in allowing those 10 buildings in the mall in the first place, did not want to be a part in making Washington DC uglier again. One of his concerns was the original location of the building would ruin the view of the mall from Pierre L'Enfant's tomb in Arlington Cemetery. And if that sounds like a silly concern, imagine you create a beautiful plan for a city. So beautiful in fact that near 100 years after your passing, you are reinterred in a plot overlooking your design made manifest in a beautiful waterfront. And then some asshole just dumps an office building and 40,000 bureaucrats in front of it. So the building was moved to here, clear from the view, and because the plot was no longer Pentagon-ish, the building could just be A pentagon, just like the star-shaped fortresses of old America. How nice. So anyway, Boeing is now running around telling everyone that will listen that the Pentagon is evil. One of those people was Abbott Abby Hoffman. That's the Will Ferrell-looking guy in Forrest Gump. Wish I had time to go over his life, but the important bit is that he's also hooked with the Spring Mobilization Committee to end the war in Vietnam. They are planning a demonstration on Washington DC in October 1967, just a couple of months after the Summer of Love. So he and fellow activist Jerry Rubin suggest, hey, why not the Pentagon? Beat poet Gary Snyder suggested they go one step beyond and announce they would levitate the Pentagon. Hoffman, not one to let a PR opportunity go to waste, ran with it. After all, a protest where you have thousands of people marching towards the Pentagon is serious and scary, and it will put all of the powers that be on edge. A protest where you have thousands of people marching towards the Pentagon with the intent to lift it 300 feet in the air, turn it orange, and then this somehow ends up with the war ending? Much less scary. By the time you're having permit negotiations about how much you'll lift it and making handbills with the instructions for the levitation, which is also now an exorcism, the crux of the matter has long since been ignored.
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest.
It wasn't ignored on the day itself. The protest on the Lincoln Memorial and march towards the Pentagon produced fantastic photo opportunities, was a landmark event in the 1960s anti-war movement, and served as a more politically focused counterpart to the Summer of Love. Indeed, just a couple of months after this, Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin would go on to form the Youth International Party, or Yippies, who did political activism and commentary through pranks and large satirical events. Today they would have a moderately successful YouTube channel. I guess now is as good a time as any to mention that, at least according to later interviews, nobody really expected the Pentagon to actually levitate. Like nominating a pig for president or protesting in favor of marijuana legalization by just getting astoundingly baked, the whole thing was a lark. That is, for everyone except poor Michael Bowen, who apparently earnestly believed that the collective vibes of every hippie around him would make the building rise up, vibrate, lower, and then it would be all over but the returning troop transports. Maybe he was right and it was just a botch job. One of the things their permit didn't allow was a circle of hippies holding hands around the Pentagon. So already the exorcism is ruined. That's before they had to fight against underground filmmaker Kenneth Anger, who was underneath a truck trying to re-hex the Pentagon. It didn't take long before people tried to breach the security ring and break in, which is when the situation escalated into a riot and we got the arrests and the injuries. By 7 AM on October 22nd, it was all over. While the building didn't actually lift off the ground, as far as the organizers were concerned, it was a success. The opposition to the US involvement in the Vietnam War was an issue that became impossible to ignore. The Youth International Party now had a working template for future actions. The counterculture movement continued as strong and confident as it had been in front of the Lincoln Memorial until Manson and Altamont took all of the wind of their sails. And as for the people who had the idea in the first place, Hoffman continued to be an activist until his death by overdose in 1989. Jerry Rubin remained at the forefront of his generation by becoming a stockbroker. He got run over by a car in 1994. Michael Bowen continued his journey through art and spirituality until his death at age 71. Finally, John Stark Cook. Who is the source of this causality denial? Well, according to that interview of his sister, in 1956 someone placed a scarf upon his shoulders. Moments later, he felt an intense burning sensation on his shoulders and a pain in his spine. He removed the scarf to find a burn on his shoulders. That burn deepened over the years and was finally diagnosed as skin cancer. Cook died in 1976 at the age of 56. No word on whether the scarf had a Pentagon motif.
Now say and you float and rise yourself off the ground right now in front of all these people on the radio.
Okay, all right.
I want to see you better rise off the ground. Defy gravity right now.
Okay.
Cheryl just
Still
rolls
on the
off her
ground.
ground. She just rolls off the ground.
I'm still on the ground.
She is floating on her
You're
spirituality
not
right
being
now.
honest.
You understand? She is floating right now. This is a karma compass, everybody.